Hello and welcome to the February update to Empires of Aether. It's crazy to think that where this game started that we would have fairly regular updates to a game, because this is a board game with an ever-changing meta, evolving with all these new players that are getting involved in their playstyles and them exposing mechanics that are just way too powerful. We are just after the end of our first Empires of Aether tournament, where we crowned our first champion, who felt that he was worthy of the title Darth Aether. I, for one, am very excited for the next event, so that someone could possibly dethrone this man. He can't hold on to that title forever. Absolutely not. But thank you to all who are getting involved and playing the game frequently and, giving suggestions. This is a really, really cool journey, and I hope that, more of you get involved because we've got a lot more to go, and I think there's a lot more to be gained from this. And so we're really, really excited to see where this thing goes. Either way, what we are trying to accomplish here is we're trying to balance all the elements that are available to make them, acceptable in most scenarios, right? We don't want elements to be completely unplayable except for a very niche scenario, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the elements that have dominated the current metagame, or perhaps those that are very, very weak, and we're trying to bring them to the forefront here. And so we begin with Magma. Magma is banned in like 80% of the games as of late. And yet, in the few games that it has been played recently, just absolutely dominant. And I think that is because of its easiness to accomplish its Tier 3 quest, which is to own 5 volcano tiles. Well, what we did is we actually changed the first Tier 1 passive ability, which right now, or previously, was 5 food, 5 EM to convert a mountain, desert, or swamp into a volcano. That's actually fairly flexible. Mountains are among the most common tiles to appear on a board, and deserts and swamps sprinkled in there, tiles that aren't really sought after by most elements. Magma had a pretty easy time at doing this, and with a relatively easy investment here. But now, with 10 food, 10 BM, we're doubling the cost, but you can convert any owned tile into a volcano tile. I do think this is going to slow them down a little bit because I do see Magma as a late game nation going for those quests and perhaps those economic victories, and so I do think this will slow them down. It is possible that their volcano passive is still just too powerful because really it eliminates the need for food, which I like that design. That was in the initial concept for myself, but having volcanoes to generate you the military presence while also bolstering your economy, but the fact that it's giving you free soldiers so that you can hold on to every food that you earn is perhaps a little too strong. But if we give them less access to volcanoes in the early game, perhaps this will do the balancing for us. So let's see if that is going to do the job here. Next, we're going to give a little boost to Earth. The original 4 elements have been incredibly strong, but Earth has been lagging behind them just a little bit. And so we wanted to bring some of their abilities to the modern era of Empires of Aether, with more dynamic decisions to be had here. First of all, extensive fortifications would only allow you to build 3 defensive fortifications on a tile. It didn't give them to you at all. This one now allows you to place 3 defensive fortifications. So if you have a tile that is in high contention in the early tiers and aggressive nations are just kind of bullying you, well, maybe you can thwart them off with a 3 defensive fortification tile. But their overall strategy, what I think most Earth players want to go for, is to stall for Tier 3 and pop this Spare Rooms ability. But where they lack the strength in that is that the troops were traditionally spawning at their capital tile. And that's just too slow in the late game. They would have to take several turns to get to the middle of the board or wherever they're going after in order for the soldiers to really make an impact. And we're not always wanting to bring Summon Citadel in the Tier 2 stage. And so we're adding a little more flexibility here. We're allowing you to spawn those soldiers on your capital, your citadel, or your general. And you can spread out where those soldiers are going. So if you're getting 5 armies, you could put 2 on your general, 2 on your capital, and perhaps 1 on your citadel, so for example. So giving them a little more flexibility. And I do think this is going to give them more ease in accessing their Tier 3 quest, which is to own the 4 central star tiles of the board, and I think this gives them a legitimate pathway to success in a lot of games. Next, an element that was truly dominant in the Empires of Aether Invitational, Sand. The only thing that we changed in their passive is what happens when they own 3 deserts. During the tournament, it was to receive 10 of one resource and 5 of the other. Sand is a late game element, and yet this bonus was propelling them to the late game in turn 3, turn 4, which that's just way too fast on the timeline. And so we're going to tone that down just a touch to 5 food and 5 BM. But in addition to that, we're also going to nerf that mummification passive. In the few instances that I've seen it used, it is absolutely suffocating to those who are going against it, and it feels that sand is impenetrable whenever they get a couple of pyramids down, because every soldier that perishes becomes theirs, whether it is friend or foe. And that is a lot to swing over. And so they can just sit there, farm up their soldiers, while also putting pressure on boss tiles or the 50-50 economic win condition. And so Sand was incredibly powerful in the tournament, and I do think that they are only a really good pick if you've got access to 2 deserts in your corner, which is what makes them sort of a niche pick. But when they had those 2 deserts in their corner, they seemed unstoppable. And so I think this will tone them down just enough to where it feels like you can play against them. Next is Lightning. Lightning is the most aggressive element in the game, yet their quest was totally inaccessible to them. Now, most of the time, Lightning doesn't even want to go to Tier 3, but we're giving them sort of a little motivation to get there. Because if they eliminate a nation while in Tier 3, that automatically wins them the game. I am a little hesitant with this change because what I think could happen is Lightning could suffocate whatever corner they're going at in the early game, taking away all of their tiles except for their capital tile perhaps, then farming up to Tier 3 over the next few turns, and then killing them and winning them the game. This would force the opponents across the board to adapt their playstyle to go and perhaps interfere with Lightning doing this, which I do like that aspect of it, but it could be too powerful. That being said, Lightning's late game really has not had any presence in any playstyle of Lightning in all of the games that's been played recently, which that is sort of the strategy in their creation, but there should be merits to going to the late game. Or, when these later game nations beat me to Tier 3, does Lightning ever stand a chance? And that's been an issue for them as of late. But, the changes that we've all been waiting for are with Blood. Blood has been garbage. I played it myself. Garbage. Incredibly weak. It's a sort of late game nation that once you get to the late game, it just doesn't have the payoff. It's also slower than a lot of these other elements. And so we are going to be bolstering some abilities while also adding some new ones. And I know this is going to be to the delight of several players out there who have tried to make Blood their mains. And I think we're going to find that it is going to be a very, very unique playstyle now. Let's take a look. First and foremost, their Universal Donor ability was a double use ability, but didn't actually affect your blood doping passive, which of course is the cornerstone strategy for your Vampire General. Now it can only be used once, but it will go to your general's passive. And so you really want to hold off and use it for sacrificing an army to give your general an extra plus 10 in combat. Then we are also going to go ahead and buff up Prince of Darkness to Tier 3 and bring that down to 40 soldiers. Now, I actually executed a plan the other day where I was able to sacrifice over 30 soldiers in one turn, getting me close to that 50 mark, and yet it's still wasn't that close. I wasn't going to be able to do it in the next turn. And so it just felt way too slow. You have to hope that your opponents agree to do nothing to you and allow you to just become this absolute beast of a creature that they can't stop in the end. Who would agree to that? Who would agree to that? So, giving them a couple of buffs on their original kit, and now we're going to also buff their passive. Their passive had nothing to do with slaying any enemy generals, and I really like the notion of the general being more powerful, right? More powerful than any of the soldiers for all of the elements. So, wouldn't it stand to reason that the Blood General wants to fight those really powerful beings? And so, what we've done, and let's get a little adjustment here, what we've done here is we've added some motivation for the Blood General to go at enemy generals. Because if he defeats an enemy general in battle, that will count as defeating 5 soldiers. So every enemy general that they slay will add plus 10 to their attack. Everything else is staying the same for now. could prove that this general passive might be what tips him over the scale of balance and makes him too powerful. Who knows? We're going to find out. But the new abilities that I think give them a very unique spin on their element, already more unique than what it was before, but it also forces them to make some very, very strong decisions with what abilities they are taking. For example, Sanguine Blade is a tier 1 passive, but all three of Blood's abilities have been instrumental in their relevance in the mid game. And so taking Sanguine Blade forces you to give up one of those other ones, and that can be very, very difficult to do. And yet, the early game potential is massive. Every combat victory achieved that involves your general will give you 5 additional food to allow you to get to the later game, sacrifice more soldiers at your altar, getting your general more and more powerful. But what I think is the coolest ability on here is paying homage to Blue Shadow, who has played Blood a double-digit amount of times, has lost every single time because of how garbage they were, had some bad luck along the way. There were a couple of games that should have been his, and yet the dice didn't fall that way. But he's getting his own ability here. Blue Shadow, Red Shadow. At the start of the game, your general begins at the Elemental Temple. However, he cannot move until turn 3. I see this only being used if you are the first or second pick element in the game. Because if you're going third or fourth, or sorry, first or second pick, meaning you're going third and fourth, you start with a larger amount of resources. You don't need your general necessarily to expand on the board. But if you're going first or second, you need your general to expand on that early corner. But this can be used aggressively. Turn 3, I'm at the center of the board. Perhaps I go after the corner that is the opposite from me. Something that most elements wouldn't be able to do. And I really, really like that if a Blood player is taking this ability, I feel like it impacts every other player's early game decisions. And I really, really like abilities that disrupt the tempo of games and make them feel even more unique from the last. And so I think this is the coolest one on here, and I want to see how people use it. I know I've got a few ideas myself. Bat form. This is being put in because Blood was absolutely devastated by 5 different advantage cards in the deck, which means the likelihood of, one or more of them being drawn in a game was pretty high. And so this allows their general to get back out into the fray. They still have all of their eggs in that one basket, the general basket, but before, if they would get incinerated by a dragon or summoned home perhaps, the general would have to take several turns to get back out into the tiles in contention. Now this allows him to teleport from castle to castle. However, he cannot move after he does that, even if he has his bonus movement. After sacrificing 20 soldiers in tier 3, he cannot do it if he is teleporting. And so I think this makes them much more relevant and much less absolutely hindered by these advantage cards. I think it's quite unfair for a few advantage cards in the game to absolutely ruin an entire match for a Blood player, and you have to just hope that those cards aren't drawn. That's not very healthy. And so, rectifying it with this ability right here. And then, what is perhaps the strongest ability on here, and I'm not sure if it is too strong or what, but the Crimson Cloak. You may revoke 5 soldiers from your Blood Doping passive to negate an advantage card that is directly affecting your general. This does not impact elemental abilities, only advantage cards. But those 5 cards we were mentioning just a second ago, gone. At the cost of 5 soldiers, maybe it's too much, maybe it's too little, not sure. But either way, the general has protection. But you're also having to give up your later game goals. If you're trying to get to that 40 soldier passive, you're going to have to sacrifice a little bit along the way and delay your goal getting there. But we're also adding to this update several new advantage cards, several new weather cards, and I'm looking into adding a couple new bosses, perhaps several new bosses, and some more relics for the Hephaestus Smith. We're working on a couple of new mechanics to add to the game, to add to its just absolute variability from match to match. We're going to post a new for public download file, and I'm working on a randomly generated board so that the board on your end will be random every single time. This next download file is going to have several boards for you to choose from, but I'm hoping the one after that will have the random generator on it. So as you can see, things are happening, changes are being made, and more of you are getting involved. So please keep telling your friends, keep telling your family, tell your friends in other states, tell someone that you heard them talking about something nerdy a few years ago. Hopefully they'll be into this. And if they're into this, that's more people to add to the table, more games being played, and of course, we're heading for the top. Anyways, thanks for everything that you've done for this so far, and I hope you guys are enjoying it and enjoying the ride. This is Empires of Aether, and we'll see you at the next table. Bye-bye.